they'd be an accurate reflection of what you'd have everyone hear. Amen. All right. So we are continuing with this sermon series called Kingdom Way. We're going through the Gospel of Matthew, and we are in 4 chapters today, chapters 14, 15, and 16. Like the first half of 16 is really what's going on here. But what we've seen in the Gospel of Matthew so far is that a lot of times I think we have to get God's attention in order for him to notice us, right? But Jesus keeps saying, like, no, the kingdom of God is right here. The kingdom of God is at hand, is the way. He's like, it's right. It's as close you could touch it, right? Right there. And we see that Jesus comes as Emmanuel, which means God with us. So like that's God is with us in all these things. And we see that Jesus goes to all of these people and lets them know that God is with them. But there are some people that are like, I'm better than all of this. I'm better than all of you, right? Like all this stuff. And those people don't like Jesus very much, right? Like so, but in order to get there, I got to talk about my weekend, all right? This last weekend. Last Sunday, I left here and I went up to Daytona because my friend and I, Mark, we write all of our sermons together. If you ever want to hear this sermon delivered with competence, Messiah Tampa is the place, right? Like that's, you can watch it online. You're like, wow, that was better. And so he and I write all of our sermons, and we do these planning retreats about 2 or 3 times a year. And this year, it was successful. We're planned out in the sermon series, all the readings, the main ideas, all that stuff, all the way through, I think it's January 4th of 26. So some of the things that I am excited about, I think we're doing 6 weeks in the book of 1 Corinthians. That'll be fun. We're doing a bunch of Jesus said what? You know, like these weird sayings of Jesus. And then also for Advent this year, we're going to do, surprise, surprise, for some of you in the room, the Christmas Carol. Dickens' Christmas Carol as the sermon series. So for Advent. So that'll be fun. So you may want to get that book out, dust it off, and read it a few times before then, because I bet we'll see some stuff you hadn't seen in it before. But it's great. So way we do this trip is we go up there and we go to the Port Orange Walmart, which is like just south of Daytona, and we buy all the supplies that we need for everything, what we're going to eat and all that. And we both get there, and when we see each other, we're like, the Daytona 500 was rain delayed, and it's still rain delayed. We're like, So we finish our shopping a little quicker than normal, and we get to the condo, unload it, and we're like, man. Like, it's going to take us about an hour to get into that track from here because you got to park and then you got to take the bus. You know, it's a whole ordeal. And like, can we actually get in there like in time? So I called Sean, who was at the first service today. He's one of our winter people. I knew he was at the race, and I was like, when are they going to get back on the track after drying it and all that stuff? And he's like, you got an hour. And I'm like, I think we can do that. We hopped in the car and bought tickets. And it's amazing how lower the prices of tickets are on an afternoon of a rain delay, right? And so we got in there and we get to the free parking lot. We're not paying for parking here. And take the buses in. We get over there and we're walking in, and on the way up to our seats, we're sitting up real high, and which is good at a race. And we get there, we get our chicken fingers and some hot dogs as we go, and we walk out and we get right in our seats, and they go green right in front of us over there. Perfectly timed here. Look at this picture, right? There. Look at those seats, right? Like it was great. I'm pretty sure there were $350 a seat tickets before we bought them. So we did pretty good. And some of you are like, is Mark standing on a step or something like that? Like, no, that's just how tall he is. Yeah. So, but we were watching the race, and we're having a great time watching the rest. We saw most of it there, and it came down to the last lap. And one of my favorite drivers is a guy named Denny Hamlin, driver of the 11 car, and he like that's like listen, I don't even know who you are, and you're already booing the good stuff, man. Like that. he was in the lead, and I was like, this race is worth it, right? And he came around to the back stretch, and all of a sudden this huge wreck happens. And and I can't really make out the cars. It's very far away from where we're sitting. And I notice that coming off of the corner, coming towards us, towards the start finish line, in the lead after this wreck is the 24 car William Byron. You need to understand something about William Byron. Nobody likes William Byron. I know. No, not a soul, right? Like boo, boo, boo. William. And I will be honest that when he crossed the finish line in first, I was like, I don't know if this was worth it. But that's probably just emotions talking over anything else. But what the reason why I'm talking about all this is Denny Hamlin, the guy who was in the lead. By the way, William Byron was in 9th place with one lap to go, right? And Denny Hamlin was like he just lucked out. He was on his podcast the next day. He lucked out. He didn't deserve any of this. Like all this stuff, it was all just a fluke. We all crashed out. He didn't we need to get back to the old Daytona where you're like making like the winning move for the race on the last lap and all of that stuff. It was all just lucky. And even William Byron said in Victory Lane, he's like, I don't know, kind of lucked out on this one, right? Like all those things. And it's this, essentially what Denny was saying is that he didn't deserve it, right? He didn't work hard enough for it. He didn't do enough for it. He didn't do the right things, make the right moves, all those things. Oftentimes, we think that's kind of how faith works. And that's what these 3 chapters are all about. Matthew chapter 14, 15, and 16. It's all of these stories that are filled with people that are criticizing Jesus. They're like Pharisees that are wearing these wonderful robes with green tassels on them and all that stuff. Oh, wait, right? And so, but they're like, they believe that they deserve what they're getting because of their heritage, because of who they are. Their practice is more devout. And Jesus ends up showing us that it's actually faith that is integral in the kingdom way. That we don't get in because we deserve it, because there's something else. And so, let's get into all these stories. So we're going to rapid fire them till we get to the story about the crumbs here. But what we see at the beginning of chapter 14 is the feeding of the 5,000. Now, what happens right before this is John the Baptist is beheaded by Herod. Boo, right? And this is like a visceral reaction from everybody when this happens. Like Jesus, it says that Jesus happened. Remember, that's Jesus' cousin. And John the Baptist may not have gotten Jesus right in a bunch of ways, but he's still his cousin and all that stuff. And Jesus just wants to go be alone. He's like, I just want to go out in the woods and just live off the land for just a little bit here. I got to process this, right? Like honest emotion there. But the thing is, like, everyone else thought that John the Baptist was going to be this great big revolutionary. He's going to be the one that finally frees us from Rome, right? Like he's saying all this stuff, and everyone else has this same reaction about John the Baptist. And they follow Jesus into the wilderness, just wanting answers, wanting something there, right? And they get out there, and Jesus has compassion on them, and he begins to heal the sick, and he's preaching to them, and all those things. And the disciples, they're looking around, they're looking at their sundials on their wrist, right? And they're like, it's getting kind of late, Jesus. And there's no Publix out here, none. I've looked, right? There's nothing here. Like over there, tell these people to go home. There's nothing for them out here. Tell them to go. They need to go get something to eat. And Jesus goes, you give them something to eat. And they're what? And then Jesus takes 5 loaves, 2 fish, and feeds all 5,000 of these people, right? 5,000 here, and so much so that there were all these basketfuls left over. How many basketfuls? Ooh, 12. All right, I don't mean to cast stones, right? Or cast loaves of bread today. But first service got that real good, all right? 12 basketfuls left over. How many basketfuls were left over? There we go. like that. Like that. So like that, so 12 basketfuls left over in the midst of that. And the whole point of that is like even in the midst of the disciples' lack of faith, Jesus does this amazing miracle. Then right after this is Peter walking on water. And in this story, like the disciples are in a boat, and Jesus kind of like walks on the water out to him. And Peter sees Jesus, and gets all excited. And we did a bunch of study for this one, and this almost was the sermon, and I could preach just about this, but I need to tell you about this one little nugget that I found that I didn't know before. When Jesus is walking on the water, and Peter is like, call me out to you, right? He goes, like Peter's going, just tell me to come out to you, Jesus. It's the same wording as when Jesus calls Peter to feed his, Jesus calls him from fishing to come fish for men. It's the same wording, except it's coming from Peter this time. It's almost like Peter is wanting to relive the glory days of the past here, right, again. He's like, call me like you did before, Jesus. I want to feel those feels again. I want to get out there, right? Like, and he gets that, and he steps out there, and he's like on the water. He's like, woo! And then he like looks at everything, and his rationality begins to set in, and he begins to start sinking as he looks at the wind and the waves all around him. And Jesus ends up picking him up and reaching out to him. And says he doesn't have the faith. Right? He doesn't have the faith. And then we have a story about the scribes and the Pharisees, and they're talking about how awesome they are. They have all of this piety. They know what the faith looks like. They know what all the little individual words mean. They know what all this stuff is. And they look at everyone else, and they look at them, and they're like, you guys may eat kosher, but we are kosher plus. You know? We deserve God's grace, right? We try really hard in our faith. Like, we faith harder than any of you guys over there. And Jesus to them says this: it's not what goes into someone's mouth that defiles them, but it's what comes out of their mouth that defiles them. You know? Y'all think you have faith, but by showing how you live and how you treat people, how you treat the image of God, shows that your heart is in the wrong place. And Jesus accuses them that they're all like the blind leading the blind. They're like lemmings going off of a cliff. And then we get to the heart of the story today, the Canaanite woman. Now you gotta understand. There's so much stuff in this story that is cultural that we have to understand, and I'm going to try to lead you guys through that. It says that Jesus then went into a region of Tyre and Sidon. Already. Everyone in here should be clutching your pearls. You're like, excuse me? He's going where? Because, like, you don't have to know a lot about the Bible, but do you know who's from Tyre and Sidon? That's where Jezebel is from. You don't have to know much about the Bible. You know, you're like, I don't like Jezebel. Not a good person, right? It's a Canaanite area. It's filled with Gentiles, right? This Gentile area, and they're not people of faith. They are outsiders of the faith. Then this Canaanite woman comes up to Jesus, and you need to know a few things about this woman. A, she's a Canaanite. The Canaanite people were supposed to be exterminated in the book of Deuteronomy because they were a people that worshiped false gods. They did child sacrifice, all these things. And the other thing you need to know is that the Hebrew Messiah was supposed to come from Israel, right? That it was Israel's Messiah. This was a prevailing belief. But this woman comes up to Jesus, this Canaanite woman from that vicinity, and she came crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly. She calls him Son of David. That's a Messiah term. Even Jesus' disciples weren't calling Jesus the Messiah at this point in the story. That's at the end of chapter 16, which is next Sunday, which is the Sunday before Ash Wednesday, by the way, right? We start up Lent in 2 weeks after this one. I'm thinking about doing Ash Wednesday, the noon one, maybe outside. Ooh, I know. Well, I got excited about that. The last time I tried to do that, I got a bunch of calls Wednesday morning. It's going to be too cold, Pastor. It was 65 degrees that day. I'm not casting stones, but, right? Like that's, we put on our puffers and we come to church, right? Like at the 65 degree weather. And we send it to all of our friends up north. Anyway, and then they make fun of us. And, but, she calls him the Messiah. Before anyone else really does. This outsider, this Canaanite, right? She doesn't deserve to be able to say anything like that. She doesn't deserve anything. She's a dog. She's a filthy foreigner, right? God's come for his own people. She's Canaanite. They worship false gods. She's already getting what she deserves, right? She couldn't possibly have faith. And Jesus didn't not answering her. And his disciples came up to him and urged him, like, listen to what this sounds like. This doesn't sound good, boys. Send her away. She keeps like crying out for us. Like tell her to be quiet, leave us alone. Like we're tired of her, right? Like going over there. And then Jesus almost seems like he agrees with all this sentiment that we're talking about. He goes, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. Let me tell you something, right? This is kind of a weird thing. It's like, I thought you were like for everybody, Jesus. Like, all that stuff. A lot of what Jesus says, especially in the Gospels, and some of you are going to disagree with this. That's fine. That's fine. Read it with a little bit of your sarcasm knob turned up. Because that's a lot of how Jesus teaches. It's got the sarcasm knob turned up, all right? But he's like, I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel. It looks like Jesus is agreeing with the sentiment of the disciples, like, you just get her out here. I'm for only Israel. Like, it's like, don't feed the dogs what they're getting here. You know, and he says it's not right to take the children's bread and just toss it to the dogs. He calls this girl a dog. Like what in the world, Jesus? By the way, I see people take this passage and run with it in a bad way. I know, right? And that, but that would make sense. Jesus came to fulfill Israel. Like Israel first, right? But then she goes, yes, it is, Lord. Yes, it is. But even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. She's essentially saying, Son of David, the Messiah, Jesus, I see that your grace is so large that even if I have the crumbs, it'll be enough. And sure enough, Jesus says something here that he hasn't said in this entire section. He remember, like the disciples, all of you don't have faith. Peter, you lack faith. Pharisees, you guys are traipsing around in your robes and stuff because you lack faith. And yet he looks at this dog of a woman and says, woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted, your daughter is healed, and her daughter was healed in that moment. This woman doesn't deserve anything of faith. She's a Canaanite, and Jesus says that your faith is great. She has this faith, and her daughter is healed, and then what happens? And this is why I was talking about the sarcasm, because Jesus often brings us into these stories, and then the stories end up exploding in a direction that we're not anticipating. So, like, this woman says all this, and Jesus says something he hasn't said in a long time. You have great faith, and God's grace explodes out and says even the crumbs are enough to feed the daughter. And that God's grace explodes out of there, and we get the feeding of the 4,000. Now, the feeding of the 4,000. What this is right after that story. And he does this feeding in a Gentile area. Like this area of the outsiders and those that don't have the right faith, right? All of these out there, he feeds the 4,000 over there. Now, let me ask you something. The feeding the 5,000, right? What does the 5 and the 5,000 stand for? Does anyone know? You know, we think that may mean something. One of the things we think is that something that was really important to the Hebrew people was what we call the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. That's like the real Bible to the Hebrew people. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It's called the Pentateuch, the books of Moses, right? Like that's it over there. And so it's kind of this whole thing. And then how many basketfuls were left over with the 5,000? 12. Oh, that sounds familiar. Like you got 12 tribes of Israel? Like it's very Jewish. You hear it? Like all these things. So now we have the 4,000 and he's in this Gentile region over there. What does the 4 mean, do we think? Now, I could be wrong about this. I'm not. But I could be. Because commentaries don't all agree on this. I think the 4 in the 4,000 stands for the 4 corners of the earth. Right? And then how many basketfuls were left over with the 4,000? Anyone remember? 7. Good job, man. Said it with authority over there. Man, goodness. That's 7. 7 basketfuls. What does 7 mean? That's like the 7 days of creation. It's like all of it. Right? Like all of it. Like the 4 corners of the world. Suddenly God's grace explodes into being for all the nations of the world, right? All of them, all the nations can experience the grace of Jesus in the midst of the crumbs. And you got to understand how you got to put yourselves in the place of an original Hebrew hearer of this. Because if all of you were listening to me talk about this and you were original, first century Hebrews reading this, you all would be clutching your pearls right now. Oh my goodness, fanning self, yelling, I declare, and all that stuff. I don't know what's going on. Because to put yourself in there, there was a deep-seated hatred for the Canaanites. They did terrible things. You can imagine that they would have stories and have gotten upset about this. Don't you know what we have been through? Don't you know what my family went through? That all of this, because of this woman's ancestors and the pain that she has wrought onto all of us, we are the ones that are chosen. It's Israel first. God chose us to be special. He's the one that saved us out of slavery in Egypt. He guided us in the wilderness. He gave us the divine command to take the land. It was us, not you. And He gave us all the laws that made us better than all of you. We don't eat pork or shrimp. We don't bend our knee to eat dirty, scavenging animals. God has set us apart, not you. He made us better. You guys can live, sure, you can live whatever life you want, but we are the ones that are set apart. Does that sound familiar? I think we often have the same feelings when we practice our own ways, our own faith. I come here Sunday morning and I listen to that guy's boring sermon so one day I can be in the glorious above, right? We know the 10 Commandments. You guys know all the 10 Commandments, right? We at least have the right numbering, right, Kyler? Ariel? Yeah. Yeah, we know all that. At least we number them properly. We deserve the blessings from Jesus. Because look at all those cronies out there that is driving by, not listening to all this. Look at all those dogs out there. That's they don't have the right faith. But Jesus says something interesting. No, Jesus doesn't just say it. That would be Gnostic. Jesus shows us a different way. That He shows us the faith that saves us is that Jesus goes to the place of the dogs and dies. Jesus goes to the, you could say, crummy cross and dies. And 3 days later rises again. That in His resurrection, that's the faith that saves you. Or as Paul puts it, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. We don't deserve it, but we still get the victory and life everlasting. just like that good-for-nothing William Byron at the end of the Daytona 500. I'm not sore about it. Not sore, right? And this is the point. This section of Matthew is meant to step on our toes, is meant to mess with us, to get us to clutch our pearls and go, what really saves us? And this is here getting us right into Lent, into this section here where we're going to go in and we get all the way through to the end of Lent, and Jesus shows us what saves us. It is what he does for us, but not just for us, but for all of us. And you can tell that he's trying to step on toes because what he says at the beginning of chapter 16, Jesus asks, you of little faith, why are you talking amongst yourselves about not having any bread? Do you still not understand? Don't you remember the 5 loaves and the 5,000? Remember? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Very Jewish. And how many basketfuls were left over? 12. 12 tribes of Israel, right? Or 7 loaves for the 4,000? All the 4 corners of the earth. And how many basketfuls were left over? 7. For like the completeness of the creation, the crumbs of his grace are enough for the dog of a Canaanite woman. The crumbs are enough for the 5,000. Remember the loaves, remember the crumbs, remember the 12 basketfuls, remember the 7 basketfuls, remember all of that. So what does this mean? This is all very interesting. What does it mean? Here's what I think it means. You ready? There's often so much pressure put onto us. I need to love these people, hate these people, think this way, think that way. Here's what I think it means. Breathe. The crumbs of Jesus' grace are enough for you, for me. There's a time coming soon where the creator of breath itself will stop breathing. But after 3 days, he will breathe again, and that new breath will mean that we can breathe forever. It's going to be okay. It's backwards. It's beautiful. It's the kingdom way. Let's say a prayer. God, we thank you that you love us so much. Lord, when we get all caught up in I got to make sure I do everything just right, Lord, help us to see the crumbs in the Canaanite woman. Help us to see the basketfuls left over of 12 and 7. Help us to see how your grace explodes into those Gentile outsider regions. And we see faith that we could even hope to have. Lord, continue to give us the breath that sustains us each and every day. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. Before we